Hello and welcome to Paul on Politics. Now, as the summer holiday beckons and politicians depart for the Tuscan Hills, or possibly Margate Beach, how do they assess the state of their parties? And as the roads get choked with families departing for a vacation, is the high rate of exclusions in Medway down to the fact that holidays are cheaper in term time? And when does founded criticisms of our politicians stop and gratuitous abuse start? As MPs debate the issue of social media being used not for sensible political debate but for keyboard warriors to sling mud at anyone they like, is it time for stronger action to be taken? We've managed to persuade two politicians to postpone their flights to reflect on these issues and the week in politics in Kent and Medway. Joining me on the sofa are Teresa Murray, a Labour councillor in Medway, and Simon Cook, the Conservative leader of Canterbury City Council. Thank you very much for joining us, and let's hope they don't agree too much. Now, new government figures have shown that Medway schools have the highest rate of exclusions in the South East. Surprisingly, secondary school exclusion rate was twice as large than any other local authority, with 79 children excluded between 2015 and 2016. Medway came in as joint 7th worst in the country, with permanent exclusion rates up by 35%. Josie Hannett reports.
There'll be quite a positive feeling across primary and secondary schools in Kent today as they prepare to break up for summer holidays. And in just a month's time, we'll hear about GCSE and A-level results in Kent and Medway, and generally they're quite good. However, the bad news that's come out today is the fact that Medway is 7th worst place in the country for the number of pupils who've been excluded. In 2015 to 2016, 81 pupils were excluded in a fixed or permanent term. But for Kent, it's actually quite positive news today, as the figures have gone from 2014 to 2015, 100 pupils were excluded, and the latest year only 58 were sent home. Medway Council said it's disappointing to hear the high levels of exclusion across the area, but they are aware that this is a decision that schools won't take lightly. They say more needs to be done. They're going to work with teams across schools in Medway, across inclusion teams, and hopefully these figures in years to come will be going down. This is Josie Hannett in Chatham for KMTV.
Well, Teresa, there's obviously an issue in Medway. What's going wrong?
There certainly is, and I think the first thing to say is nobody can be happy about this. And I've got a lot of sympathy for the teachers who make hard decisions and for the children and families who are affected by exclusion.
Why is Medway so bad?
Well, we know that education is the absolute foundation that everybody needs for success, and if you're excluded from school at any age, your education is going to be damaged. And so I do hope that the ruling Conservative group will be taking all the action that they can to stop this. There are a number of reasons.
What would you do yourself if you were in power?
Well, first of all, I would make sure, the Labour group would make sure, that teachers and schools generally have got the support they need to deal with children who are behaving in a way that leads to them being excluded from school. I've heard lots of stories about school exclusions, and one of the things that worries me is that when problems arise, there's often a delay in getting help. We know nationally there's been a huge rise in the mental health problems that young people have. And I've heard lots of stories from parents who have tried to get referrals for children and families' mental health services, and sometimes find that they're waiting even up to 18 months. So if someone's mental health is poor and that's leading to bad behaviour, there's a wait to get specialist help. Obviously, the situation can escalate. A child can be excluded.
Okay.
Before they get the help they need to cope with the situation that they're in school.
That's certainly one issue.
That's one issue.
Simon, what would be your solution if you were in charge?
Well, unfortunately, I'm a district councillor, so education is not part of.
Well, let's
part
pretend
of my
you're
remit.
a unitary for today.
That's one idea. I think the point that Teresa makes is a key one. That this is not something to be happy about. There's no political capital to be made in this.
For anybody.
For anybody. I think the fact that Kent is good and Medway is not so good. I think perhaps Medway can look at what Kent have done and see if there are things that they can learn from that. But there's no ideology in this. This is quite simply it's every single case is a tragedy and it needs to be looked at.
Does the responsibility lie mostly with parents? or mostly with schools?
I think it's far too. It's sadly, it would be lovely if everything was black and white and it went to somebody's door. This is just such a complicated thing. There are so many different cases, and they're all different. And it can be the parents, it can be the child, it can be the support they have, the teachers, the school. There are so many factors. And let's be clear. This is still a very, very small number of children. It's not to wash over it, but the vast majority of children get a really, really good education and enjoy their time at school.
I think that's true, and it's important to acknowledge it. When we want children to be successful at school, it's a partnership between parents, between schools, and indeed between local authorities, even when schools are an academy. And one of the things that sometimes happens is that there's a failure by schools to draw parents in at an appropriate time, or indeed to build their expectations. And in Medway, Paul, you might be aware at the moment we've got 19 Sure Start centres under threat of closure.
I wonder whether you're going to bring that
and it's absolutely relevant to this. There's a huge campaign to try and stop that happening. Now, all head teachers say if children go to Sure Start, and they're on the record for saying this in Medway, they will be much better prepared for school. So we have to start as early as we can to think about how important education is, to educate children to know what to expect, and educate their families to know what's expected of them.
Do you need to educate parents
yes,
as well?
and certainly that's something that Sure Start does very, very well. It educates parents and children about what to expect in terms of attendance, in terms of wearing uniform, in terms of behaviour, and of course in terms of all the success and fun that you can have when you're getting a good education. So if people start with a positive feeling about school, they're much less likely to be excluded. If that positive feeling washes away for any reason, either because of things like bullying, which we know can have a terrible impact on children and young people, or because there's been an interruption in their education, perhaps caused by a family bereavement or some other problem, then we need to find the source and work together across the education system.
Simon, let's just bring you in here.
Because for me, exclusion, temporary or permanent, has to absolutely be a last resort.
Simon, the government has sort of recognised that there's an issue around travel firms bumping up their prices in the summer, but no action appears to have been taken. That must be adding to the the numbers.
It's absolutely, and as a parent of a child who's just going into year 6 at primary school, I absolutely recognise that. You look at the prices of holidays and suddenly they go whoosh as soon as term ends. It is an enormous temptation to go, oh well, what's a week matter? But it's difficult because every child is different, and saying that week they might miss something entirely critical and important and never catch up. So
is there a case to be made for clamping down on tour operators, holiday firms? Because it's always raised as an issue, but very little action seems to have been taken.
Well, I think that is the joy of the free market. They will respond to demand, and if there is a much more demand during school holidays, prices will go up. I don't like it any more than I like petrol prices going up in various places, but it is the way of things.
Do you think the government does need to intervene? Is there a case for the government to intervene?
I think that sort of thing is a very slippery slope. That when the government says, well, we don't like that bit of the free market, we'll intervene there. It's a bad habit to get into, frankly.
If people are having a good experience at school, if parents are completely supportive of what the school's trying to achieve for their children, then I'm afraid that conversation doesn't happen. I understand the temptations. I'm a mother and a grandmother myself, and I know how difficult it can be for some families, and I do think that there's a huge amount of unfairness in the market, whether it's a free market or not. But if school is motivating, if children are enjoying school and they feel valued there, and their parents feel that too, then going on holiday shouldn't even be on the table, because the important thing is to enjoy your education.
Well, it's the end of...
And Paul, I would just like to say...
No, hold on, we haven't got time.
Yeah.
We've got to move on, I'm afraid. Now, it's not just schools who have ended the term, it's politicians too. Now, against many people's expectations, Theresa May has not been dumped by her party yet. And Jeremy Corbyn is riding the crest of the populist wave despite not winning the last general election. Meanwhile, Vince Cable has taken the Lib Dem leadership with incredible stealth and by default almost, while UKIP is still awaiting for an outcome of its leadership contest. All of this against the biggest political question in a decade: how do we handle Brexit? Well, Simon, give us your kind of impartial assessment of the Conservative Party, and then I'll invite Theresa May to give hers.
Theresa May.
Oh, Theresa May, I beg your pardon.
Thank you very much indeed.
I think the Prime Minister has done a good job. given the challenges,
good job in the circumstances.
In the circumstances, look, it's a position that nobody in the Conservative Party wanted to be in after the election. Nobody wished for this. We are here. Given the nature of the government's majority or lack thereof, I think so far it has not gone too badly at all.
So you're not anticipating a leadership contest, and what's the feeling amongst the grassroots activists?
I think the key issue, and I said this last time I was here, to use that phrase again, it is stability. People want their stability, simply because we have had such a run of elections, such turmoil in politics.
Who prompted all those elections then?
I think that's all
it was
talking
your
about.
Party.
Well, that's still talking about history, but we are where we are now,
history.
And we are where we are.
Oh, you're forgetting the general election from a few months ago. I can see Teresa laughing there. So
yes, I'm enjoying this enormously.
Let's ask you about Jeremy Corbyn. Everyone got it wrong about Jeremy Corbyn. Probably people like you are saying he's the worst thing to have happened to the Labour Party.
Simon is being enormously kind to Theresa May. She asked for the election. She said that she wanted stability and has created the most enormous instability, to the point where she's had to bribe a group of people with public money to keep her in power.
As for Jeremy
Corbyn,
give me your assessment.
As for Jeremy Corbyn,
let's just take that.
That's what the question.
You're suggesting that she is bribing the politicians personally. She is taking money and giving it to a highly underfunded part of the UK. Are you suggesting that the people of Northern Ireland, which has had so many troubles over so many years, are not entitled to more funding?
I don't begrudge the people of Northern Ireland any money at all.
You're not putting £1 billion into the DUP's pockets. You're putting £1 billion into Northern Ireland, which has had so many troubles. Is that not something to be?
I don't begrudge the people of Northern Ireland anything more than I begrudge anybody in the UK who's been a victim of terrible austerity for 7 years.
You two are doing perfectly well without me. We'll come back to this after the break. Welcome back to Paul on Politics with our guests Theresa Murray from Medway Council and Simon Cook, the leader of Canterbury City Council. We've heard a lot this week about politicians complaining about people complaining about them. Social media platforms provide an opportunity for instantaneous judgments about our elected representatives. But are things going too far? Let's hear from the Gillingham and Rainham MP, Raymond Chishti, in a debate on abuse of MPs about his experience at the general election.
And I have to say the culture in this election campaign was one of the most difficult I experienced. So when I stood up to make my acceptance speech, to thank all the electorate, to have an activist in public say back to country X, and the matter is then referred to Kent Police, and they are investigating it under the Public Order and Racism. So let them do their job. But in public, a Labour Party activist who happens to be a former group assistant to the Medway Labour Group, says that in public, as you're making your acceptance speech. I ask each and every one of you, if you experienced that, how would you feel?
Well, Theresa, this is in some ways an interesting, if bad, development in terms of the political kind of environment. You're obviously on Twitter, and Simon is, I know. Do you get much abuse yourself about what you've been up to, personal abuse rather than political abuse?
I can honestly say I don't really. I mean, if people disagree with me and they're doing that in a fair and reasonable manner, I'm prepared to respond to them. If people are abusive, I generally don't respond to them, and if they get very abusive, then of course I would block them. But I do understand how undermining and sometimes frightening trolling and abuse can be. And normally it's being carried out by people who would never dream of saying such a thing to anybody's face.
I mean, are we putting enough pressure on these organisations, these multi-global international companies, to do something to weed out?
No, I don't think we are putting enough pressure on them. I mean, people have been driven to suicide by the abuse that they've received on Twitter or Facebook, and I include in that many young people whose experience of life is more restricted to the online world, perhaps, than some people of my age. So I do think that the companies have a responsibility, actually, and I do think that they should send out a positive message every time somebody joins Facebook, every time somebody joins Twitter. They should extol the positive virtues of that environment and make some expectations about behaviour and the way that we speak to one another online.
Simon Cook, you're against state intervention in the holiday industry. Perhaps you might be in favour of state intervention in terms of tackling this issue and social media.
I think there's a case to be made for that, certainly making sure that people can be followed up robustly. There's no, on one hand, Twitter have a sort of anti-troll policy, but how rigorously that's enforced is open to question. And certainly making sure that really abusive behaviour and let's say robust interaction with politicians is part of the course. You have a thick skin and you take things with a grain of salt, but there are some very unsavoury things being said.
I mean,
and it is, at the end of the day, yes, it's free speech, but free speech itself has its limits.
I mean, I think what's interesting is that, you can opt out of Twitter, to avoid it, but it does nothing to address the problem. The problem is still going to be there with other people if you're not on Twitter.
Yeah, and if you are, partly it's politicians have to be on social media, but so does young people. I think if you're not on social media now for a young person, it's equivalent to me being banned from the telephone when I was young. It's an essential, integral part of your life. So saying you can step away from it, it isn't really available to young people. They need the WhatsApp, Snapchat, or Instagram, or whatever it might be, and actually saying, well, you can just switch the television off if you don't like it. That's really not the point. The point is, as you say, tackling the bad behaviour. And it's not bad behaviour. Quite a lot of it is, criminal, abusive, and that's something that doesn't.
Sometimes politicians bring things upon themselves, don't they? Obviously, and we just play you a question that Helen Whately asked in Prime Minister's Questions this week, which triggered quite a lot of Twitter comment about the fact that she'd used this question to effectively have a go at Labour, if you like. So let's hear what she had to say.
Last week, our National Health Service was judged the best healthcare system. Best, safest, most affordable. Better than France, Germany, Norway, Sweden, Switzerland, Australia, New Zealand. Too often in this House, we focus on the negatives. And I've heard the Labour Party attempt to weaponise the NHS. Honourable friend, and I hope the Leader of the Opposition, when he stands, congratulate NHS staff on their skills, dedication, and the hard work they have put in to achieve these high standards.
No, it's the end of term, so there's a bit of jollity around the House of Commons, but it is that kind of thing where people use time in the Commons and PMQs not to raise questions about necessarily their constituency, but to have a go at another party. That's
Well, I think, Paul, it's set up as an adversarial situation. And
but that was so obviously a planted question.
Yes, absolutely.
And it's not the first time it's ever happened.
No, it's not. No,
people do use questions to advance a particular situation for either side, don't they? So you'll get questions from the party in government, and Labour have been as guilty as anybody doing this in government, that are designed to show that the government is doing well, set against questions from the opposition, which is shown to who are trying to show that the government is doing badly. On that particular question, I don't think that Helen Whately's judgment was very good. There had just been a discussion about the fact that NHS workers have not had a pay rise for 5 years.
And yet apparently are the best, the system is the best in the world, so you can have it both ways.
Well, that's because of their commitment and dedication, not because of the way the government value them.
What was interesting about that question and the subsequent developments was Helen came back and sought to explain and justify what she was saying. But you didn't necessarily get a feeling that it was a productive exchange either in the Commons or on social media.
This is the way of PMQs. It's parliamentary theatre, and so much of parliamentary democracy functions behind the scenes or in less committee rooms scrutinising the law, that sort of thing. This is half an hour of parliamentary theatre, and as Tracy says, the Commons is set up as an adversarial system. There's a reason the two benches are 2 sword widths apart. That's how it is, how it's always been developed. There's nothing necessarily wrong with it. Confrontation, adversarial politics brings out the passion in people. It's when it spills over from rigorous, robust confrontation into unpleasantness, that's where you have to worry about it. But I don't have any particular problem with that. It's nothing that hasn't been done before.
Does it advance the level of debate?
I think what happened to Helen Whately there, actually, is that she was so determined to ask that question. she didn't attempt to modify it in the light of the discussion that had just gone before, which I think that was why there was so much real concern about it, because the Prime Minister had shown a bit of sympathy towards public sector workers.
And she in turn was celebrating.
She's still sticking to not giving them a pay rise.
We have to move on, I'm afraid, from that discussion, but thank you very much for your contributions. And something lighter, perhaps, to mark the political recess. In the spirit of Theresa May's Fields of Wheat admission, which is now a political legend, what do the people of Rochester consider to be the naughtiest thing they've done? And do we judge politicians too harshly?
When I work for the railways, and I once charged a fare, they give me the money, and I give them what I thought was the correct change, but it wasn't. So
I got married and I was in adultery, and I told my husband. My husband forgave me, and we've been married 34 years.
And I picked up a tablecloth and it had 2 tickets on it, 2 barcodes, and I showed them the cheapest one.
Yeah, I slept with another man's wife. I suppose they could say that. I was a single chap, but I look back and think, well, I shouldn't have done that.
I think everybody's human. You know, we all do silly things at times, don't we? And maybe if this was before they were an MP, then I don't see why we need to visit it again, really.
I think too much is expected of them. We expect them to be perfect, and they're not.
Really, I think where they are in charge, they should try to make an effort to kind of be what is right.
You know, you've got to be up for scrutiny, but at the same time, I think, you know, people are humans. They should be allowed to be human. So there's a balance to be struck.
Well, Simon, come on, the obvious question. What's the naughtiest thing you've done? Is it running through a field of wheat or something else?
God, it makes me sound like some kind of saint. I was having a think about this, and I genuinely, the best thing I can think of off the top of my head was when I was much younger and I was doing my Duke of Edinburgh Award, we were doing a hike through Chatsworth up in the Peak District. And we took a wrong turning somewhere along the line, and about half a mile down the path, was it into a field of wheat? It wasn't in a field of wheat, but a gamekeeper came along and sort of indicated fairly robustly with his shotgun that perhaps we were on the wrong track and we should take a different one.
There's a theme emerging about Conservatives' admissions
enjoying the countryside, exactly so.
Theresa.
I think the people of Rochester have got a touch of over-disclosure. There's going to be some interesting dinner party conversations based on some of those clips. I'm quite boring. But I'm always protesting about something with good heart and good faith. And most recently, in the general election, when I was a candidate in Rochester and Stroud, I was chucked off the concourse in Rochester Station for giving out leaflets. And my grandson was with me, and he admonished me. He said, you should have known about that. And anyway, there's a CCTV camera up there, so they can still see you if you go back, which I did, by the way. Thank you very much, Network Rail.
You can get that camera footage on using the Data Protection Act, incidentally. Simon, do we expect too much of politicians? Do you think the bar is set too high? Really?
I think we have to accept politicians as human, and certainly expecting them to have been monks before they were politicians is probably asking too much. Louise Mensch was one of those who said, well, frankly, yes, I did take drugs and I did enjoy it. Perhaps the key thing we should look for politicians is a lack of hypocrisy. When they say one thing and do something else in their private life, that's a very bad habit.
Well, that ought to be a cue for a discussion about county council's allowances, perhaps, but we're running out of time. Thanks very much for Simon and Theresa for joining us on tonight's show. You can catch up with all the political news on my Twitter account, Paul on Politics, and reading Kent Online at www.co.uk. Thank you very much for watching. We'll be back soon.